Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. Hope you enjoyed our tunes to get started. We are delighted to welcome you to our final session in the Working Remotely series. For those of you who have been joining us over the past 10 weeks, we have hosted a series of 8 sessions focusing specifically on helping to bridge the gap for those of you who are finding yourselves in a working remotely situation, perhaps for the first time. So thanks for joining us, and we're excited to have you here today. So as we always do, we like to start our sessions with an acknowledgement of the land that we're meeting on. So I'm joining you today from my home office in Warman, which is located on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional lands of the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and is the homeland of the Métis. We pay respect to the treaties that were made on this land and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. We are committed to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And I know that I have been particularly grateful over the past couple of months, spending a lot of time at home to be able to get out onto the lands that we're so fortunate to call home and have an opportunity to reconnect to that land. So we invite you to check out our past sessions, particularly in the Working Remotely series, if that's an interest of you and you haven't been able to attend the sessions in the past. I do apologize that we are going through some website maintenance at present, so if you're finding that the links aren't working as they normally do, please bear with us. We will be working to get those back up as quickly as possible. So on our website, there's also an opportunity to sign up to our email newsletter. So you'll receive notifications about upcoming sessions. So after today, we've been stepping up our pacing and our cadence to respond to immediate need as folks have been transitioning to working in a remote environment. We'll be returning to our normal cadence following this session, so once a month sessions. So you'll make sure to receive those updates if you sign up to our newsletter about upcoming sessions. And so over the past couple of years that we've been hosting QI Power Hour, we've been just so grateful and so fortunate to see some really good uptake here in our home province of Saskatchewan, across Canada, and internationally. And so one of the reflections that I've been sharing with participants over the past number of weeks, specifically during the pandemic, has been the recognition that QI Power Hour has historically linked together folks primarily in the healthcare sector, but just recognizing an increased appreciation for all of the sectors and all of the industries that contribute to a healthy community and society. So whatever organization you're joining us from today, I do thank you for your work. And so we invite you to share in the chat this morning where you're joining us from. So the organization or the location that you're joining us here from today. I know that Sherry, our speaker today, is going to make some extensive use of the chat, so we just also want to orientate you to where you can find that function. So for those of you who may be new to the WebEx platform, you can find the chat function by clicking on the message bubble icon at the bottom of your screen, and this will launch the chat panel to the right-hand side of your screen. We do encourage you to send your comments to all participants so that we can all be part of the conversation. Great. I see that, that folks are finding the chat. Thank you so much, and welcome. So one of the tools that we use to share out our learnings is Twitter. So we invite you, if you're a fellow Twitterer, to join in the conversation on Twitter using the handles QI Power Hour, HQC Sask, and Sherry's Twitter handle for today, which is Tactful Sherry, and the hashtag QI Power Hour. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome back Sherry Furness, This is her second presentation within the Working Remotely series, so she has been busy collecting materials over the past number of weeks to share with you today. So Sherry has a Master's of Education with a focus on instructional design. And in her role as director at HQC, Sherry works with the provincial health system partners to create innovative and effective learning programs. She began experimenting with learning campaigns and microlearning as part of her overall fascination with miniature things. So Sherry, I'll pass things over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chelsea. And I'm just going to get my notes up here. All right. So as Chelsea mentioned, I do have this strange fascination with miniature things, starting back in childhood for some reason. This is a picture of one of my pandemic projects. So it was this kit that you put together to create this miniature library, complete with working chandelier and all. Took about 2 months of very painstaking work, but it is absolutely adorable. Of course, nobody's allowed to touch it because it was too much work, but it is pleasant to look at. So given my love of all things miniature, it's not surprising that I was really drawn to the idea of microlearning campaigns when I first heard about them. And then as I started experimenting with the approach myself and seeing how effective it could be, it's really cemented for me that this is a really good learning method to have in the toolkit. So the plan for today, I'm going to share with you 2 reasons why microlearning works really well, particularly for remote learning, which is the situation that we find ourselves in today. My hope is that not only will you become a convert, but that you'll also know enough about the benefits to help you persuade others in your organization to try this approach as well. We're going to look at the SMALL approach. It's an acronym that we'll unpack for how to create a campaign. So we'll go over each of these 5 steps so you get a sense of what's involved with doing a learning campaign. And because we only have a short time together today, I just want to share some examples so you can kind of see the possibilities of this approach. And of course, we'll leave you with some resources and tools so that you can start building your own campaigns in the future. Okay, so Chelsea did mention that we would be using the chat. So here we go. A bit of a challenge, a bit of a scenario to work with throughout the session today. So think about a training that you are having to revise or something that you know is coming up. Or maybe it's a training that you've offered in the past, but now you want to think about what might it have looked like if we did it as a learning campaign instead. So add your topics to the chat, and if you do, give yourself 100 points. I'll just give you a little bit of time to think about what a topic might be. Also, just a note about points. So throughout the, oh, cool, people are putting stuff in your audio, that's fantastic. So throughout the session, you are going to have a chance to earn points. So we're going on the honor system here. You all look like very nice people, wouldn't dream of cheating, so I totally trust you. But keep track of your points as we go through, and at the end, we'll see what kind of grand totals we get with the group. And so I'm seeing lots of interesting stuff in the chat. Some of it I don't understand what it is, but I'd be interested in doing it as a learning campaign. So virtual meetings, COVID procedures, absolutely. Safety stuff, IT management stuff, prenatal education, so LILT, yeah. So we're seeing a gamut of stuff. So, you know, we all have stuff that we need to keep the learning going. We have some constraints that we maybe hadn't expected prior, but this is what we have to work with right now. And learning campaigns, I think, are a really great approach that would be a fit for any of the topics that I've seen put in there so far. Okay, look at that. Another opportunity to earn some points. And you could earn up to 1,000 points with this, which is exciting. So give yourself 100 points for each item you check off this list. If you've ever watched a YouTube video, if you've ever asked Google, Alexa, or Siri to help you find some kind of information, if you've read a book, a chapter, or a few pages at a time, listen to a podcast, if you've watched a TED Talk or some other webinar, read a blog or an article, if you've ever like retweeted or posted something on Facebook that was like interesting information, if you've ever commented on a discussion forum or maybe written a review for a product you purchased, joined in a book club, although we will also accept tasting events like wine, cheese, chips, depending how fancy you are or not. Or if you've ever gone to a museum or a gallery, even if most of your time was spent in a gift shop, but honestly, museums tend to have really good gift shops. So no judgment there. So give yourself 100 points, and I'm just curious, people want to share how many points they feel they racked up. Otherwise, keep track on your own. Oh, 700, nice. Love it. Okay, oh, 1,000, well done. Okay, so 800, I mean, this is going to be a tight race for points by the end of this. So if you checked off even one of those things, you have already engaged in microlearning. Microlearning is just small, bite-sized chunks of learning, and it's very natural to how we learn in our day-to-day lives. Nobody, I think, ever sits down and says to themselves, I have to watch every YouTube video on YouTube, or what's the point? Or if I can't read this 800-page book in one sitting, I'm not even going to bother. Of course not. We watch a 5-minute video on how to fix our garden sprinkler, or we read a chapter of a book and then we put it down for a little bit before we come back to it. So intuitively, we're very good at microlearning. So a microlearning campaign is really just taking these bite-sized chunks of learning and putting them together so that they help you reach particular learning objectives. So it's just taking what we do quite naturally and making it a bit more intentional and focused. So just a quick look at how this campaign approach differs from a more traditional classroom or workshop approach. So first, a workshop is a point-in-time experience. So you're there for the day, the week, whatever, and then you leave. So it's more of an event. In comparison, a learning campaign it's over an extended time frame. So you have these multiple points of time where you're having these micro-learning experiences. So it's a bit more of a journey than it is an event. So that's one difference. A traditional approach tends to be a standalone experience. So although you might get some hands-on practice in the session, it tends to be a bit disconnected from daily life. So you go to the event, you learn, and then you return to your own space, your own workplace. And it's often up to you as the learner to transfer that learning back to your daily life. In the campaign approach, it's a little bit different because the learning is embedded a bit more in the daily experience of life. So you're maybe watching a 10-minute video and then right away you're going back into your workday. And so it's a little bit more integrated and it's a little bit easier to transfer that learning into your daily life. Traditional approaches focus more on the formal learning. So in a workshop setting, we might have some informal learning, like during breaks or lunch, we might have those sort of more networking connections. But for the most part, the learning is quite structured and formal. In contrast, campaigns are a mix of formal and informal, and the formal part is quite small, again, micro. So there are some teaching parts and learning activities, but also a lot of informal learning. So optional activities, challenges, and using social tools to connect with others in the campaign. And finally, the traditional approach is typically instructor-directed. So when we walk into a workshop, we kind of have some expectations that the instructor is going to, on some level, facilitate the day, kind of help guide us through the agenda. It would be a bit weird if they came in, sat at the back, and didn't do anything all day. We would be kind of like, when are you going to get this going? Learning campaigns are a lot more self-directed. So there are opportunities to practice, to explore more, to connect in a lot of different ways. And so the learner has a lot of choice in how they engage with the ideas. I will say neither of these is better than the others. It really depends on the goals of learning, and one might be more appropriate than the other. I've participated in some absolutely fantastic workshops. One that was really wonderful. It was a very intense 5-day workshop. It's the only workshop I've ever attended where they had a disclaimer ahead of it saying, don't even try to do anything in the evenings, you'll be too tired. But it was great. But I've also had some absolutely fantastic learning workshops that really changed how I did things or helped move me to another level in a topic. So both good. I think the main point is it's good to have a range of methods in our toolkit so that we can just create those meaningful learning experience for a diversity of context. And right now our context is having to make a lot more use of remote. And again, this is where learning campaigns can be really make use of that space. Just a quick note about social learning, because it might be a term that people haven't heard before. So it's not new. It's something that we do all the time. It's when you wander down the hall or you ask someone a question or a recommendation for a product or a service or whatever. That's social learning. It's learning with and from others. One thing that is new, though, is we have social media tools that and different platforms that can really amplify the ability to do this. So you don't have to be physically in a space where you can wander down a hall. You can put something on Twitter. So, you know, you can use Facebook to show people what you made for dinner or to shame your pets if they've done something terrible. Or you can use it to connect with groups or to crowdsource ideas or to post and discuss interesting articles. So that's what social learning is, and it's something that learning campaigns make really good use of. Okay, so earlier I said I wanted to give you 2 great reasons for using microlearning campaigns. So here they are: attention and retention. So attention. This is probably not going to surprise anybody. Most of us know that attention is fleeting. Most of the research says that sustained attention lasts for about 10 minutes. And that's if you are really interested in it. It's way less if you don't find it interesting. As humans, we are constantly scanning our environment. It's the thing that has kept us alive and safe, is just being aware of our surroundings. So we are highly distractible creatures. That's just who we are. If you got an Amazon package delivered right now, I'd lose you. I know that. To be honest, if I got an Amazon package delivered right now, I would lose my train of thought, and I'm delivering this. It's just a fact of life when you're working with humans. Our attention can wane quite easily. When I was doing my Bachelor of Education, one of my professors said something that I'll never forget. He told us that no matter how dynamic we might be or how thrilling our content, if a cart with a squeaky wheel went by, everyone in the class would be completely distracted by it. So that's really humbling. I mean, there's me, a person who might be giving the lesson of a lifetime, and yet at the end of the day, no match for this. But this is a really great thing about microlearning, is that it uses small chunks of learning, and so it really works with this limited attention span. And I think this is one of the things that makes it so powerful for learning. So the second benefit, so that's attention. Retention is the other benefit. There's been a lot of really great research in this area. There's a wonderful book called Make It Stick that goes into the research in quite a bit of detail. And so one of the things that has come out in the research is that spaced practice leads to long-lasting and durable knowledge. So they had a study of med students, and they had one group that did 4 practice sessions all on the same day, and then another group that did them spaced over 4 weeks. So same amount of practice, but the group that spaced it, their skills were stronger. So one of the things that this research found was that the key to successful learning is not the total time, but the way that we distribute it. We are terrible judges of how effective our own learning is, and so we often think cramming is effective. And part of this is because it feels effortful, because it is, and we equate that with being effective, and because we retain a lot in the moment. But literally the day after the exam or whenever we needed that information, it's gone. In spaced practice, this learning really does stick over time, and so it becomes very enduring. I inadvertently did an experiment with this with my father. So for whatever reason, we discovered that there was this one song that he could just never remember the name of it. And so my sister and I thought it would be funny from time to time. We'd just be like, Dad, what's the name of that song? And the name of the song is The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And, because as he was trying to remember it, he would just say the most hilarious things like, oh, no, not the Blue Man Group. And then he'd remember it. And we would just do this randomly. We'd just be at dinner and we'd be like, Dad, what's the name of that song about the boat? But over time, he became quicker and quicker at remembering it, to the point where now if we say it, he can do it like that. So spaced practice, we did it so much that it actually created long-lasting and durable knowledge over time. So it does work for my own personal experimentation, as well as the ethical research that other folks have done. But again, this is one of the strengths of microlearning. It takes learning, and instead of making it an event, it's this journey. So you do get this time between, because that's just how the method is set up. Okay, so those are the 2 great reasons to embrace microlearning, but how do you actually do it? So we're going to look at the small approach for how you can create your own campaign. So I just say this is an acronym, so it stands for set the objectives, map the campaign, assemble the components, launch it, learn and improve. So we're going to look at each of these in a bit more detail. So set the objectives. It all starts with learning objectives. So even though campaigns are a mix of formal and informal learning, the objectives are still a really essential starting point. And here we go. We have another chance to earn some points. Really curious to see how the numbers are looking. But so here you go. 100 points if you have ever used learning objectives in your learning events. 250 if you always use them. Like you won't do a learning event if you don't have objectives. And 500 points if you convince at least one other person to use them. And if you want to share your totals in the chat, oh, 850, well done. Excellent. Oh, good. I feel like the message is getting out there. People are getting converted. This is fantastic. Perfect. Awesome. So objectives really set the destination for the campaign. So they are letting you're thinking about all these different micro-learning experiences. What are we bundling them towards? What are we trying to reach by the end of it? These are some questions that I find really helpful when I'm thinking about what those objectives should be. So what's going to be different for the learner by the end of the campaign? What will they know or be able to do that they couldn't do before? How will you be able to tell if they achieved the goals? I find this a really good one because it makes you think about what's it going to look like, and that helps you kind of unpack what it is you're really trying to do with the campaign. So is it, if you start off with, I want people to understand coaching, and you think, what would that look like? How could I tell if they understand coaching? You would probably say things like, well, I would see them use effective questions. I would see them using active listening. And so then you're kind of getting some of those objectives are use active listening, that they'd be able to demonstrate effective questioning. How far do you think the learning will take them? How much will they develop? So part of this is thinking about how deep is this learning going to go? And why are you doing this? So what expectations do you have? What is the hope? If you want people to be able to actually use the knowledge, if that's one of the objectives, if they can apply, you need to be kind of setting that early so that your plan includes those opportunities to apply and practice. So we've talked about micro-learning campaigns being a mix of that formal and informal, and the social learning. So one thing I like to do to set the tone for that really early on is put the objectives in plain language when I share them with the learners. I absolutely love loose taxonomy. When I'm crafting learning objectives, I'm very, very precise with them. But for the learners, I want them to know in human terms what this is really all about. So this is a whiteboard from a campaign we did on graphic facilitation. You can see in my example that one of the objectives was get started with some basic tools and techniques. My formal objectives were much more detailed. They were things like identify the components of the visual alphabet, combine the visual alphabet to create icons, apply lettering techniques to develop a personal font library, etc. But the description for the learners was much more informal. Here's another example. So this was a learning campaign about learning campaigns. It was very meta. And you can see there's a full list of objectives that are very specific, very measurable, develop, draft, curate, design. But the description for learners is quite plain language and really just tells them more about what's going to be different for them as a result of this campaign. Okay, so you've got your objectives, and now you're ready for the next step, map the campaign. So this is where you'll want to think about the pace. So what is the time frame for running this campaign? How frequently are things going to happen during that time frame? And also the sequencing. So what order makes sense for the topic area? So let's look a little bit about pacing. So thinking in time blocks. So learning campaigns, we want to keep the chunks of learning small. That's the micro part of it. So you're aiming to have weekly learning load be anywhere from 30 to 2 hours, maybe shorter. It depends on your topic. But you're looking at keeping that required effort really, really small. You can provide options for more for your keen beans that just want to keep diving in. So if they choose to dedicate more time to it, you can give them those options. But otherwise, you're thinking about what are the smallest chunks of time that we could break this down into. You need to think about the reality of your learner as well. So you have your objectives, but then you do this feasibility check of what is it actually going to take to get there. And you always want to design for reality. And so that includes the constraints of your learners. You may absolutely love to have a 6-month weekly academy on something that's super interesting, But if your learners could probably only commit to a 6-week block, then you need to design for the 6-week block. So what can you do? How far could you go in that time frame? Thinking in bundles. So you can bundle your content so it feels less effortful for your learners, and then you can maybe do a little bit more with those micro chunks. For example, the acronym SMALL is a way of bundling. You just have to remember one thing, the word small, but it's actually 5 steps. So that's a little bit magical. And also thinking about depth. So the further you go from very simple things to complex things, the more time you're going to need. So this means that you might not only need more time for the campaign, but more time between different sections of it for people to process the learning. So that's pacing. The other thing that you want to think about when you're doing your campaign is the sequencing of it. So lots of different ways to sequence. These are 5 common ways. So world related is basically like how the world is organized. Most of us, if we took a history class, they're going to go from past to present. I've seen them where they haven't done that, and it's a little confusing. Not impossible, but it's how we naturally think of time is past to present, and so it might make sense in a history class that you would teach it that way. Inquiry related looks at teaching ideas because they represent similar phases. So if you're teaching a process, inquiry related is probably the way to do it. For example, if I was doing a campaign on how to do a QI project, I would follow the steps of the QI process. Problem identification, testing ideas, implementation. It'd be a little weird if I started with testing, then went to implementation, and then said, once you've implemented it, then go back and figure out what your problem is. That would probably not be a great fit for it. Utilization related is where you teach the most commonly used things first. So if there's no specific order in the physical world or it's not a process, utilization could be the way to go. So for example, if I was teaching QI measurement, I might start with run charts because they're more commonly used, and then control charts, starting with the most commonly used control charts and then going to some of the lesser used ones after that. A couple other strategies, so concept related. So if you have in your discipline a way that things are particularly taught, you might sequence your content to fit that. So I worked on a health promotion course that started with the history of the discipline, then the different models that were used, and then the applications of them. And then finally, learning related. And so this is where you go from familiar to unfamiliar. So in elementary school, it was like where we learned about our neighborhood and our city and our province and then our country and sort of outward that way. You might, let's say you had a leadership course, it might start with that self-reflection with the self, then learning from others in a group, and then maybe some world leaders and models and kind of going out that way. So again, here's a chance to earn some points. Thinking about the topic you identified, if you think of these 5, is there one that makes most sense to you? And if you're willing to share your answer in the chat, give yourself 150 points. I can't quite see it, but there we go. Oh, concept related, excellent. You look perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of them, if you think about the content, there's one that's going to seem like a good fit. And that kind of just helps you, again, with mapping that campaign. Fantastic. Concept related, learning related. Love it. So here's an example. So this was the campaign on graphic facilitation. So in terms of pacing, we had it as a 7-week campaign. And one of the decisions that we made around pacing was really focusing on foundational. So more on the basics of visuals, and not as much on the facilitation techniques. We did touch on it, but very lightly. Most of it was about helping people understand how to create visuals. We wanted to give people a starter kit, so the map included lots of time for practice. So rather than using the time to add additional content, we used the time for the really deep dive into using what they had learned earlier in the campaign. And then in terms of sequence, we started with the building blocks and then how they could be combined. So more of a concept-related approach for this one. All right, so now we get to the next step. So you have your objectives, you've mapped your campaign, and now you assemble the components. What are the elements that you're going to include in your campaign? So one way to think about this is to look at the categories of lessons, activities, and resources. So lessons are the teaching pieces. This is where you introduce your learner to the new ideas. In our virtual world, this can take a lot of different forms. So you might have a webinar, you might share some videos or some readings. You might have a campaign newsletter that has links to the required resources for people to go through. If you have a learning management system, you might create an online module, all different options for the teaching piece. Activities are the doing pieces. So they're the opportunity to interact with the ideas and apply the learning. And again, lots of great virtual options for this. You can have reflection or discussion forums. You can have people pair up for video coffee chats where they have some guided questions that they go through, practice exercises, games, simulations. Again, lots of different options for it. And then resources are the support pieces. So this is where the self-directed part comes in. Your learners can engage in as much or as little as they want. So resources can be handouts, they can be materials you post for them to access, it could be challenges, extra practice. Again, lots of options out there. So think about how you're going to include all three of these in your campaign. So here's an example. So this was the learning campaign about learning campaigns, the roadmap for it. So this campaign ran over 6 weeks. And so the way that we did it, each week started with a campaign newsletter that had the basic info. So that was the lesson, the teaching piece. We had pop-up sessions where we discussed the ideas and practice with concepts. So we had an evaluation game on creating rubrics that we played at one session. So those were the activities, the doing pieces. And then each week there were optional activities, like we would have a question posted on the whiteboard that everyone could contribute to. We used social learning, so we had a dedicated Slack channel, which you can see by the hashtag mark, for people to share ideas and learnings and other things that they'd come across. And those were the support pieces. So that mix of learning, lessons, activities, and resources that went into the plan. All right, so you have your objectives, your map, you've got your components, and now it's time. You get to launch it. 2 things that I'll say about launching. First, I would recommend that you do some kind of orientation to the format, especially if it's a new approach for your folks. Help people succeed by letting them know what to expect. So in our learning campaigns, we've always started with an announcement of what's coming to get people excited. You can see we always do this reminder of here's what this is. And we usually start by having some kind of kickoff session where we share the goals and start to build that learning community and just give people that roadmap of here's what's going to happen for you. The second thing I'd say about launching it is to be flexible. So I have yet to run a learning campaign that goes exactly as planned from when I did my initial map of it. And again, that is, I think, one of the beauties of micro-learning campaigns. You can adjust throughout because it's spaced over time. You know, in a workshop, you're a little bit limited. I've rarely been to a workshop where they completely revamped it halfway through the session. It's, you know, maybe some adjustments, but it kind of runs as expected. But a campaign can be adapted quite fluidly as long as you stay true to those objectives. So if partway through the campaign you find a better activity than the one that you had planned, you swap it out. If you find people want more practice, you can add some more optional sessions. And then the final L in our small is to learn and improve. So give your learners an opportunity to evaluate their own progress. How did they grow from this campaign experience? What changes have they noticed as a result? And also think about how you're going to evaluate the campaign itself. So, you know, I think especially in the early days when we were running buy-in and to understand, is this effective? Is this something that we should keep doing? It was really good to get feedback. So, you know, if we planned for it to be about an hour of effort a week, how accurate was that? Did people end up spending more time, in which case maybe we needed to adjust for next go around? What resources and ways of connecting do people find most useful? Lots of great feedback that we incorporated into subsequent sessions. So that's small. So set objectives, map the campaign, assemble the components, launch it, and then learn and improve. Okay, so I do want to leave time for questions, but before we get there, I just want to share some examples to give you a sense of the possibilities, and also some resources and tools that I found really helpful. So this is an example. This is the very first learning campaign that we ran. It's called Coaching Cornerstones. And so we needed folks that had some experience with coaching, but coaching is just one of those things that even if you've done it a lot, you just always want to get better at it because it's such a deep field to study. So we wanted a campaign that would help people understand on a very personal level what coaching meant for them. So again, these are people that have been exposed to coaching for some time. So it was taking that, of all the things that you've learned, how would you define it for yourself? What do you think coaching really is? We also wanted to explore from the perspective of Cartman's drama triangle. So in particular, looking at how sometimes our coaching gets stuck in that hero role. And we wanted people to use this as kind of a baseline to set their own goals and commitments for that continued practice. So here we go. So this is the roadmap. So it was an 8-week campaign, and one of the things we did was make the map visual by putting it up on this giant whiteboard that we had near the kitchen, which is a beautiful place to put a whiteboard because everybody goes to the kitchen. We also had an internal channel, so we regularly took pictures of the board so that anyone working remotely could access it. In today's world, with lots of good whiteboard tools out there like Mural and Miro and Microsoft Whiteboards, this could easily be made an online version for sure. And so you can see this board was at week 4, so it was about halfway through the campaign. And one of the optional activities was to dot out on the board which hero roles people were most likely to fall into. And then we kind of collected all this and then used this information for a discussion the following week. But remember how I talked about being flexible? So this voting activity actually wasn't part of the original plan, but there was just such a great discussion around the hero personas that it was something that we added in. And again, with learning campaigns, you do have that flexibility. So this is an example of the newsletter that would go out each week. So you can see the teaching pieces, the readings and the presentation, the activities. So there were some discussion activities, and then resources. So one of the activities was creating with a partner a definition of coaching, but then the social part of the learning was sharing that on the Slack channel for other people to share and comment on. And then at the end of the campaign, we had a discussion about what people had learned about how to flip from hero to coach. So the different strategies, the different signals that you were in a hero role instead of a coach. And so we took these discussions and contributions and then put them together in a handout resource. So it was a way of feeding back, here's what we learned through this campaign, but it also made it a bit of an enduring resource for folks. So this is another example of a campaign. This one was 4 weeks, so it was the month of November, and the focus is on critical thinking. So there's a little bit of teaching. It was based on the book Winning the Brain Game, fantastic book, and in the book they talk about the fatal flaws of thinking and the fixes for them. So on the board we put the flaws and the fixes. That was the teaching piece, maybe about 5 minutes of reading for people to go through that. And the rest of the campaign was practice. So each week, a new challenge would go on the board. So we had points for correct answers. First, second, third answers got the most points. Photos were taken on the board, shared internally so that everyone could join in. The rules were people could work together, but they could not Google. And as we worked through the challenges, we chatted about what were the fatal flaws that made them hard, and which were the fixes that worked to be able to solve the puzzle. I will say this first puzzle about the loaves of bread was exceptionally challenging. I had all the answers because it was a puzzle book that I had, and I immediately looked at the answer. I just couldn't figure it out. So I really enjoyed other people's struggles. It was enjoyable knowing the answer and just being like, oh, I can see where you're going wrong. Anyway, that one was very fun. This is another campaign on QI Basics. So there are different try-it-on activities for practice. So these are the activities, the doing piece, but also challenges for extra practice. And again, this is where the self-directed learning comes in. So you are going to have some folks that love challenges and will complete every single one or perish in the attempt. You'll have some folks who find them interesting, won't do a single one. They'll still be interested in learning what other people did and hearing and seeing others. They just won't do them themselves. And then folks in the middle, they won't do them all, but they might do the 1 or 2 that interest them. One of the things I really love about a virtual learning campaign is that there are so many apps and platforms that you can use to create and support the campaign. So a couple of years ago, we did a summer reading campaign that incorporated badges, because I really wanted to experiment with badges. I hadn't done it before. So I found this free platform called Badge List that let me create all these custom badges. So I had a dusted off badge. So if you finished a book that had been in your backlog for like 5 or more years, you got a badge. the Mount Everest badge if you completed a book of 500 pages or more. But what was really cool was that people began to suggest ideas through badges. So we added ones like Around the World badge, which meant you'd read a book by an author from each continent. I just thought it was brilliant. People had so many great ideas for it. And again, you'll have people that love badges. They must have them all. People that can't be bothered, that's not a motivator for them, and people that might collect one or two. But things like badges bring that sort of that social element to your campaign. This is a learning campaign I participated in recently on Design for Collaboration. It was wonderful. 3 weeks. It was very quick. One of the things that they had with their platform was a leaderboard. So you could earn badges and points for various activities, like how many people commented on your intro or liked a post that you made. It was a great experience. So those folks obviously had a very robust platform, and you can definitely go high tech, but you can also go low tech and everything in between. So one of my favorite campaign tools is using Microsoft Word to create newsletters. Microsoft has this option, Send to Mail Recipient, that will turn your Word document into a newsletter. So you can add images, icons, hyperlinks, attachments. Low tech, but a really great tool. And so this is how it outputs. It's just visually very appealing, and I use it a lot when we've done our learning campaigns internally. And then on the high-tech side, there are platforms that are dedicated to microlearning. So one of my colleagues at the University of Monterey uses EdApp. So it includes quizzes, games, content, reminders, and you can see they actually have spaced repetition built into it, which I think is just amazing. They do have a free version if you're willing to contribute to the greater good and make your campaigns open source. So I've signed up for the free version just to start to play around with it to see how it works. And of course, I will just say any tool or platform that you use, make sure that it meets your IT policies, that you understand the fine print, although it's painful to read. It's always important when we have learners engaging with things that we understand what their information, how it's being used and shared. But, you know, if this is something that you think you want to invest in, for sure, there are a lot of high-tech options out there. And then just one last idea. So you can also think about adding microlearning to your traditional workshops. So when we get to the space where we can be meeting again in workshops, microlearning can actually blend very beautifully with this approach. So the past few years, I have studied graphic facilitation with Grow Consulting in San Francisco. So I last year did the 2-day graphic recording intensive with Malgosia Kosteka from Illuma Stories. She's just an amazing instructor. Great 2 days, fantastic workshop, hands-on, full brain, all the rest of it. But one of the things that Malgosia did following the session was she launched a learning campaign on lettering. So each week she had a different prompt. You can see one here on her Instagram account, and then she would share with us how she approached it. So it doesn't have to be an either or. You can leverage the best of both formats. Okay, with that, I'm going to pause for questions. And if you ask a question, you can give yourself another 100 points.
So here we are, as you were speaking earlier. So the question was, if you create a microlearning event and record it, how can you ensure that participants watching the recording stay engaged?
You can't. They won't. Attention does wane. So, but again, I think it's that self-directed piece. So, you know, if something else really needs somebody's attention, you're not going to win against it. They're going to do what they need to do. But recordings mean they can go back in their own time and they have the space and the mental energy to take it in. You know, I mean, I think knowing that 10-minute window, you try to reset every 10 minutes as much as you can. So pausing to invite people to submit something to the chat is one way to focus them back in. But you know, it's human nature. I don't fight it, especially with adult learners. Just give them the opportunity to take in the content when they can. And I think with so many tools at our disposal that let us record and post and share, there's opportunities to do that. So, and again, it's one of the advantages you don't necessarily have in a workshop. If you don't typically record your full day workshops.
So just a follow-up question on that. would your recommendation be, if you know that attention spans kind of last that 10-minute window,
Yeah.
would your recommendation be to keep videos under 10 minutes?
Yeah, ideally. I mean, you know, I think it depends too. Like, you know, I mean, people will sit through Lord of the Rings, right? That's like 1,000 hours, as I recall. It was a long movie. So I don't think there's a hard or fast rule. It depends how relevant it is to people. But you know, I do think you need to give people something visually different at least every 10 minutes. So if you had the same slide for an hour that you were talking to, attention will wane. But if you're almost like pausing and then helping people reset, I think that it can go longer. But you can also do a lot in 10 minutes. I think part of it is challenging yourself. How little can you make this and still have it be effective? And you can make it pretty little, to be honest.
Great. Great follow-up. Thank you. So another question that's come through is WebEx your preferred online learning tool? If not, what is?
You know, I love them all. WebEx has a lot of great features. For me, really though, it starts with what are the objectives, and then what are the ways that I want to get there, and then the last piece is what are the tools that can actually help me do that. So I try not to start with the tool in mind, because then I think you build something for that tool instead of what the learning actually needs to be.
Great reminder to reground in your objectives. Our next question, how big of a team do you usually work with when you design and create one of your micro-learning campaigns? I giggle because I already know the answer to this.
It's a micro team to do the micro learning. Yeah, I mean, I think I've done them in pairs before, which I think is nice because you have someone to bounce ideas off of to co-facilitate. Um, but honestly, they've been, because a lot of it is curation and not creating a lot of new content and looking at what's out there. I find it's, you know, especially if it's a topic where you have some really clear objectives, you don't need a big team to do it. But the more the merrier for ideas and getting people to weigh in on things, but actually running them, a couple people can get it done.
Thanks. Our next question, do you have ideas on how to have learners evaluate themselves rather than someone else evaluating them externally?
Yeah, you know, I think it's going to depend on your topic. So I did, when I worked at the university, I was doing a lot of technology enhanced learning, which meant a lot of online courses. And you know, it was early in the days of videos, so it was a little bit clunky, but now it'd be so much easier. You know, I think if you want someone to demonstrate, you can have them, let's say it's coaching, have them do a simulated coaching conversation that they record and then watch it and reflect on, okay, here's what I think I did well, here's what I could do even better the next time, here's what I'd like to work on. So I think that ability to have some kind of artifact that people critically assess and then maybe get some feedback on what you noticed as well would be, for adult learning, that's often a good method. But sometimes if it's something really straightforward, you know, a simple quiz that people go through might get the job done. It really depends on how complex that learning is, how people would demonstrate it, and be able to judge, you know, evaluate it for themselves.
Our next question, do you have any tips on determining what kind of learners you have so that you can help cater your content to them so they can get the best value out of your campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to think about who is the campaign for. So that's kind of, as you're setting your objectives, it's sort of who's the audience for this kind of learning. You know, there's lots of research out there about learning styles. Most of it says that people have preferences, but they don't need to learn a particular way. So it's more about how does it fit with the content. You know, I think, again, one of the nice things about a micro-learning campaign is you can be getting that feedback throughout and adjusting. So if you're finding that you have a group that really loves challenges and responds to them, you sub that in. If you have people that love badges, for example, then you can incorporate that in. You know, you can kind of see where the uptake is. And again, you can't really do that in a workshop method, but in a learning campaign you can. So.
Great. Well, we just have one more coming in. Would you comment on using the goals to end a session For example, if one goal is to know the difference between A and B, then ask participants if they know the difference?
Yeah, you could. And again, I think this is where there's a lot of fluidity. So again, it's that spaced retrieval piece where you could do it at the end of the session, and then you might have a challenge midweek that kind of comes back to that gets people to test, do they really know this? So, evaluation can look like a lot of different ways. And I think, again, it's like thinking about what would you hope to see? And then how could you support people in getting to that place? I know that might sound wishy-washy, but it's also dependent on what your topic is. But I think there is that opportunity to be really creative in the space. And so I would say leverage that.
Another question coming in through the chat, how many hours of prep work goes into designing a micro-learning campaign in your experience? And maybe think back to your first one, Sherry. I know that you have a few under your belt now, so it might be a different story.
Yeah. It was something, so I partnered with someone on it, and we had probably like, all total was a day to kind of figure out what we're going to do. So we had a couple sessions, 2 hours where we'd be like, what about this? What about this? How would we do that? And then running it, I think there was the work of finding resources and putting together the materials. It was, maybe a couple hours a week for each week of the campaign. But so much of it, I think now is reusable, that it is a bit of an investment. Like, we've had new people come on board, and I think coaching is just one of those skills that we really use. So we could rerun the coaching Cornerstones again with a different group, and it would be a different experience. We could even run it with some of the same people, and because it's so self-directed, it would still probably be a different experience each time.
Thanks so much, Sherry. So it looks like we've worked our way through the lots of questions that we've had so far. And this is not your only opportunity. We'll share Sherry's email out in the chat if you have any follow-up questions. I know that she's open to discussing those offline. So I'll flip it back to you, Sherry, for the close of your game show.
Love it. Okay, so I'm just curious for people that have been collecting points, and again, some people don't care about points, other people want them all. Add up your grand total, and then just pop it in the chat. Let's see how people did. Ooh, 2,200. Okay, can anyone beat that? Yeah, well, Randy. I'm not surprised, Randy. Oh, excellent, Doug. Yeah, you were collecting 2,200. Okay, 2,200 is the number to beat. Do we have anyone that can top that? Oh, a million points. That's so nice. All the points. Oh, yeah. Well, 2,200. Going once, going 2,200 times. Anyone that can top that? I don't know. What do you think, Chelsea?
Well, Sherry, tell them what they've won.
Yes. Okay. So we have a tie between Randy and I'm just going to have to go back to see who the other person was. Oh, Grace. Excellent. Okay. So we do have a tie between Randy and Grace. The contest is now closed. So normally we give QI socks to our speaker. But I already have a pair because I got them at Christmas from HQC. So I have said I only have the 2 feet. I don't need another pair of socks. So the socks they would have given me are going to go to, we'll give a pair to Grace and a pair to Randy, the highly coveted QI socks, for being willing to play our points game this round. Applause! I feel like there should have been like a Wheel of Fortune noise there.
I know. I felt this is like my one moment in my life where I can do the Vanna, I can just show the socks. Sherry, I'll just get you to pass me the ball, and I will wrap things up. Thank you.
There we go.
So for those of you who have been following the series, you'll notice that we always end with this question: what can I do by next Tuesday? And so this is a framing that comes from our world in quality improvement, where it's often a complex world and where we're dealing with gnarly and complex problems that won't be solved overnight. And we know that learning new skills can sometimes feel very much similar. So this is a way of translating your goals into bite-sized chunks and identifying what the first step that you will take on that journey looks like. And so we invite you to think about our topic today, creating micro learning sessions. And what's the next step that you're going to take in your journey to set yourself down that course? So if you're comfortable, we invite you to share that in the chat. That's kind of your commitment and your journey for yourself, where you're heading. And so a couple of to-do items to close out. We invite you to download the handouts and templates for today's session. So you'll notice that we've been sharing a bunch of links out in the chat. We've also compiled those into one handout. So if you are worried about missing them, they're also available on our website. We also have the resource list where Sherry has included some additional items for you to check out on this topic. And so as I mentioned at the beginning, this marked the end of our Working Remotely series, but we invite you to sign up to our distribution list so that you stay connected with our upcoming sessions. So after this session, we'll be heading back to our regular cadence, which is one session a month. We typically take August and December off, so we'll have a couple more sessions before our summer break, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. So just a reminder that you can do that on our HQC website. And in the spirit of continuous improvement, we do invite your feedback on the session today. So you may notice that you get this prompt at the close of the session. We do encourage you to just click through continue. This is a trusted site, so you don't need to be worried, and provide us your feedback on your reflections today. So thank you so much. Enjoy your lovely Friday on a summer day. Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you again next time.